Hey there. Welcome to my brand new YouTube station in which I will review horror novels and films on a very erratic basis. I'd like to start off with one of my personal favorites, American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. This is the very chilling tale of a yuppie businessman in the 1980s who also happens to be a raving serial killer. This book is filled with social commentary. There's a lot of excess and spending and materialism going on at the time as the Reagan era, and a lot of parallels are drawn between yuppie culture and the serial killer persona, how both are so unfeeling and just insatiable. The usage of that is heavy and profound throughout the book, and it's not to be lost. Easton Ellis is not usually a horror author. He's written a number of other books, most dealing with the 1980s time period and nightlife. Glamorama was one that he wrote. The Patrick Bateman character, who is the serial killer in the book, turns up in these other novels, but they're not horror. And it really makes you think about how serial killers come into contact with people every day in these nonviolent scenarios and how they touch all these other people's lives unknowingly. So it's really on the deeper end of the pool from the thought perspective of horror. Most horror novels are not this sharp, no pun intended. But for me, I really love the character as a killer. If you're into slashers and the slasher genre, I highly recommend it. This guy starts off killing random people around New York City. This is downtown New York. He's got a high-rise apartment building. He's got plenty of money. He actually sets himself up with an alternate apartment where he can bring people for the sole purpose of killing them. I really cannot stress enough how there is just a creative use of weaponry throughout this book. Most so-called slasher novels will follow the MOs of, or duplicate the MOs of real-life serial killers. In other words, you've got a guy who's going to kill everybody with a machete, or he's going to kill everybody, with a kitchen knife. And that's going to be his MO. He's always going to be stabbing you with the knife. You got to see him coming. You know what he's going to be using, but not so with American Psycho. The creative use of weaponry throughout is a high range. He will use knives. He will use a nail gun in one scene. There's a scene where he lures two prostitutes to this alternate apartment for this seeming sex scene of a menage a trois, and then one of them ends up with a chainsaw through the torso. That was a real bullseye scene. One of my favorite chainsaw kill scenes of all time. I really also enjoyed the constant references to 1980s music and fashion. I'm a stickler for that. I do enjoy historical fiction. I like historical timepieces, where you're going to have a specific time period in which the novel is set, even though it was written in a different time period. But it's got to be done right. I'm going to have my eye out for things that don't match up, if they use slang terms from the period that aren't accurate. I'm going to spot it. And it's going to detract from the quality of the novel. But this does not let you down at all. It's got everything just spot on. I personally really like 80s music. Music from that time period, and also horror from that time period, I regard as just a joy. And it's pervasive throughout. The film uses that music as a soundtrack, which, even if you don't see the film, I advise picking up the American Psycho soundtrack because it is just one hit after another from the 80s. Some of it veers into the pop realm. I mean, hey, do you like Phil Collins? But most of it is really good electronic synth and 80s electronica, and I really love that. Really spices up the Kill Seeds because it's the whole soundtrack is that, more or less. Most of it is. One of the other aspects of this book that I enjoyed that stems from using the 1980s time period is that, hey, they're in the 80s. So it's harder to catch them. I mean, they don't have the criminal benefits of the criminology that we have now. There is just no way to track him via the internet. There aren't people on cell phones on every corner. They just have to rely on old school private eye techniques, and it does have a murder mystery type of element going on throughout the book because there's this character who is a private eye. Patrick Bateman has killed a very wealthy individual who works in his office, and this private eye, who in the film is played by Willem Dafoe. Hey, see anything with Willem Dafoe. They basically use the Willem Dafoe character in this, a private eye character. He's trying to track down and capture Patrick Bateman, who is played by Christian Bale, who you'll know from Batman fame. Before he was Batman, he was American Psycho. And he totally has to rely on old school private eye techniques because that's all they had. And it really gives the killer the upper hand when it comes to evading the authorities. The actual police are totally useless. They're nowhere to be found. In fact, they're not even suspecting that this is a serial killer and that these murders are even connected because there's no real motive other than his own fun. He really likes to just slash and kill and destroy bodies. He melts a body in a vat of acid. Hey, you gotta love melting bodies. It is just really creative use, also of body disposal, because he'll drag bodies out in body bags that are actually suit bags. So it looks like he's transporting his high-end wardrobe. No, those are actually victims. There's a good scene in the film where he thinks it jigs up because, hey, he's loading a body into the trunk of a cab, and there's a little bit of blood leaking out, and the driver stops him and says, and he thinks, oh, okay, I'm busted now. He's thinking, am I going to have to kill the driver? Am I going to have to flee? What's going to go on? The driver just is admiring this bag and asks him who the designer of it was, and he goes, Jean-Paul Gaultier. So, hey, fashion pays. Fashion is a distraction. Don't ever forget that, kiddies. Make sure you keep that in mind when you're getting dressed in the morning or the nighttime, whatever the case may be. There was never a sequel to this. Some people have complained they've wanted a sequel. I'm not waiting for it. As you'll see, and I won't give you any total spoilers on this, but as you'll see, when you make it to the end, there is a very profound statement made by the book, a very heavy handed statement about society and about human personality that really finalizes the whole tale. And I think that's the real message that Bret Easton Ellis was going for when he wrote this. I think that was his real motive, so to speak. And it just happened to stand out as a horror novel, even though there was this grander message. And I love when that happens in horror. I mean, we see it with Frankenstein, and it often gets overlooked, because she was trying to make this heavy statement about, man playing God and about science and the misusage of science, but it's overshadowed because it's this awesome horror monster. Well, you got the same thing going on with American Psycho. There's a lot of social commentary, and he's trying to tell you about yourself and about human beings, but you're distracted because, this killing is just awesome. At one point, he tries to stop. He calls his lawyer and basically makes a full confessional from a payphone. A payphone. Hey, that tells you the technology they're dealing with in the 1980s. And the guy doesn't believe him. For one thing, the conformity is so rampant that the character that he killed was mistaken for somebody else who they think was in London at the time because all these idiots look the same. And that's another really important discussion of conformity. If you look and act and dress exactly like everybody else, maybe you are everybody else. And then when you're killed, hey, maybe it was somebody else. So it also places the value on individuality. This guy that he killed had no individuality, so did he really have any value? Yeah, that's really the question that's brought up, which is really sick. This character, and maybe even the author, really sick puppy. This guy is about the nastiest you're going to encounter in literature or film, which makes it a definite must-read and must-view from a horror fan perspective. So be sure to check it out, and I will leave you with that, because next time, and there will be a next time, we're going to check out a book that is really, really dark.